That was always amazing. We'd have friends over and drive by and, wow, what's this? There's a real live tank right by your house. It's like, yeah, well, they build them here.
You look at that building, there was hustle and bustle, lots of jobs, people working every day, earning a living.
For the United States, the tank plant has been everything since the Second World War.
This was strictly built for tanks. It was designed for it, built for it.
Never before, since Jamestown and Plymouth Rock, has our American civilization been in such danger as now. We must be the great arsenal of democracy. For us, this is an emergency as serious as war itself.
As President Roosevelt spoke those words to the nation, construction workers in Warren, Michigan struggled through a harsh winter to build the nation's first factory dedicated solely to making tanks, the Detroit Arsenal Tank Plant. This enormous assembly plant would mass-produce tanks during the Second World War, helping the Allies defeat Hitler and the Axis powers. 5 years after the plant was built, World War II was won. But peace would not prevail. In 1950, war in Korea broke the calm. And then came 40 years of Cold War, that halfway house of an armed and uneasy peace, a world divided, east from west. The Detroit Arsenal Tank Plant looked to be a permanent part of the nation's defense machine.
Our military organization today bears little relation to that known of any of my predecessors in peacetime, or indeed by the fighting men of World War II or Korea. Now, this conjunction of an immense military establishment and a large arms industry is new in the American experience. The total influence, economic, political, even spiritual, is felt in every city, every state house, every office of the federal government.
As President Eisenhower spoke in 1961, the Detroit Arsenal employed more than 5,000 people, and Warren, Michigan had seen its population grow 800% since the tank plant opened. Meanwhile, the nation was engaged in a long-running Cold War with the Soviet Union. A tank plant that had begun as an emergency measure evolved into a major part of the local community and the nation. The Detroit Arsenal story is America's story. The plant rose out of a farmer's field to help the Allies win the Second World War and end the Nazi terror. For another half-century, it hummed with activity, helping the West win the Cold War. The tank plant brought to Warren a partnership between the federal government and the defense industry, the same partnership that formed after World War II in many other communities across the nation. Like other defense plants, it promised to become a permanent part of the industrial landscape. But first, it had to be dreamt up, designed, built, and proven worthy. In the spring of 1940, Adolf Hitler moved with terrifying speed into Scandinavia, Belgium, Holland, and Luxembourg. Even France was brought to its knees by the Blitzkrieg, as Hitler's tanks, planes, and troops roared through Europe. The United States had only 28 new tanks in 1940, no tank manufacturing program, and its traditional allies were under siege. But if the nation was going to become the great arsenal of democracy, military production and big business would have to join forces. The Allies could no longer afford handcrafted tanks or antiquated experiments. As engineers worked on a wooden mock-up of a tank, Chrysler agreed to oversee construction and management of the nation's first tank plant, paid for by Uncle Sam. In exchange, the nation would have an instant tank program, and Chrysler would take over a new, specially designed factory, making tanks for a guaranteed profit. It was a win-win situation. It was decided to place the plant just outside of Detroit, in Warren, then a mere village.
Well, it was mostly rumor type of things, and then when the construction started, then it became a reality that there'd be no more pheasant hunting, no more mushrooms, and the population started to pick up. Some people were curious, naturally, and they were probably a little disappointed to see the farmland being lost, but they finally realized that it had to be.
In 1946, when I came here, the community where the tank plant was located was in a rural community. Across the street from the main building was cornfields. And it was rather interesting during the hunting season, where the hunters would go out, and occasionally we would hear the pellets hit our windows as they took aim at the quail as they took up, and you'd hear bang, 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 and frankly, it was really a rural community at the time.
The plant was designed by famed industrial architect Albert Kahn. Kahn built more than 1,000 buildings for Ford and hundreds for General Motors and Chrysler, along with a number of Detroit's most important homes and skyscrapers. During World War II, he became the War Department's favorite architect. In 1941 alone, his firm built over 20 million square feet of factory space for defense production. The plant was huge, but 84,000 glass panes helped bring the outside world into the factory.
The glass itself around the perimeter was purely there for daylighting effects and provided almost a crystal palace design of outdoor exposure, so that not only the workers have the ability to be able to see out, whether it's daylight or night light, but during daytime, the light did provide a very functional aspect of the inner workings of the plant.
No matter where in the building you were, you could see daylight. That was a big difference, and it meant a lot too.
In early 1941, the government was in a hurry to make tanks, not even waiting for the plant to be finished before starting work on the tanks.
Another red letter day marked the 1/3 completion of the arsenal. Ever mindful of their fight against time, production engineers partitioned off this 1/3. Then, with the arsenal steel construction still to be completed, and with only this part of the interior temporarily heated by means of a locomotive, building of the first sample tanks went forward in earnest, and Uncle Sam's defense program began to assume definite, more tangible form.
Chrysler and the Army announced their ambitious production program to the nation in April 1941, rolling out the tank plant's first tank for a large crowd of dignitaries. Employees lined along the roof, and there was a national radio audience. Just before midnight on September 17, 1942, President Roosevelt set off on a secret 2-week, 9,000-mile tour of defense plants and Army camps. His first stop was the Detroit Arsenal tank plant. The plant's 6 lines were in full production at the time, and the test track was roaring with Sherman tanks. One 32-ton tank roared to within 4 feet of the president's car. The Secret Service didn't share the president's good humor. 2 agents leapt into the tank and questioned the renegade tank driver.
Of course, right away, the Secret Service men, they jumped, and I could see very good, but there was a commotion there for a while. And I guess the driver tank must have been reprimanded after that.
When President Roosevelt returned to Washington, he said the Detroit Arsenal was simply an amazing demonstration of what can be done by the right organization, spirit, and planning. Detroit Arsenal was indeed a production miracle. But like most other World War II defense plants, the plant was also a social experiment on a grand scale.
There was a tremendous change in the workforce, and of course in the Detroit metropolitan area that created a lot of social tensions just in everyday life. With so many women in the workforce, and many of them married women, there was not a stigma on hiring married women at this time as there had been earlier. Child care became a problem, and getting adequate child care facilities. There were a lot of domestic tensions that were generated, separation of people, the separation of spouses, husband in the military service, perhaps abroad, and the wife here working, trying to maintain a home. You had terrible housing shortages. Resources, of course, were going in directly, by and large, directly into military production. There wasn't a whole lot left over to build houses and apartments, and so you had a housing shortages, competition for the available housing. And this, of course, sparked some fierce conflicts within Detroit itself. The most serious racial riot of World War II occurred in Detroit in 1943.
Despite the housing shortage, racial tensions, and a frantic production schedule, by February 1944, the Detroit industrial area was first in the nation in war production, with war contracts totaling almost $13 billion. During World War II, the U.S. built nearly twice as many tanks as Great Britain and Germany combined. This was the great achievement of the U.S. tank program, and the Detroit Arsenal led the way, producing by itself nearly as many tanks as Nazi Germany. The tank plant emerged from the Second World War as a symbol of America's genius, know-how, and can-do spirit. There it was for the whole world to see. American industrial expertise matched with the unflagging determination of the American worker. Three groups combined on Detroit's assembly lines to help win the war: industry, labor, and the military. What was their secret? Hard work, certainly, and the dedicated patriotism found across the nation during World War II. But this innovative effort relied on more than hard work. More than anything else, the tank plant's World War II legacy is its remarkable degree of flexibility and teamwork.
Some of the very first people, quote-unquote military people, who actually supervised the building of tanks at the Detroit Arsenal were actually people who had made their names or gained their experience in the automobile industry and who were put in uniform during the war. It was a unique blending sort of military and civilian cultures, and it was, I think it was educational for both sides. It was a creation of this military industrial team that I think continues to a certain extent even today.
Indeed, that military industrial team would continue to make tanks at the Detroit Arsenal tank plant through the Korean War, Vietnam, the Cold War, and Desert Storm.
For the United States, the tank plant has been everything since the Second World War. I think the majority of the Second World War tanks were made there, although many of them were made in the local automotive industry, and that's an important point. From the Shermans to the M48s to the M60 Pattons, and then finally to the M1 Abrams series, that's been our manufacturing site. We created a newer additional factory in Lima, Ohio during the Cold War when we thought that the Detroit Arsenal tank plant wouldn't be able to handle the capacity if things got really bad. And then ultimately that was its demise because the more advanced plant was in Lima.
Ultimately, the tank plant employees put themselves out of business by creating the world's most advanced tank, the M1 Abrams, and by helping end the Cold War. On the acreage next to where the tank plant once helped defeat Nazi Germany, the Detroit Arsenal lives on, overseeing a $7 billion operation to sustain the Army's ground attack and develop arms to meet the next century's challenges. But Detroit's tank-making days are over. The tank plant, a resilient structure, will continue to be used for industrial purposes, but it will no longer be owned or operated by the federal government. For those who worked in the tank plant and those who grew up in its shadow, an era has passed.